at my notes and not. Hi, Brianna. Thank you so much for having me. My name's Rhonda Lauritzen, and I'm happy to be here because I see that the work that you're doing in helping people process their stories and become the best version of themselves is similar to what I do as a biographer. I work with people to tell their stories. Most of the people that I work with, the stories are not for publication. It's for their own families, which I believe is the most important audience we can have for ourselves. In many ways, we're our own audience for our stories. And then we want to pass on our values to future generations, to our children, our grandchildren. And in doing so, we grow and become the best version of ourselves. So I believe that when you tell your story, it changes the ending. It changes you, it changes the people around you, and sometimes it can even change the world.
Mhm.
And so there are two things we can talk about today. One is that work and the transformative work of storytelling.
Mhm.
And the other piece is a book that I've just published. We found a traditional publisher for one of my clients' stories. She was a child in Berlin during World War II. And it's a gripping story of women and children in war. And
Mhm.
it's about courage and resilience.
Mhm.
And it's a cautionary tale about war.
Yeah, I want us to talk about your book because I think that it's important for us to talk about your book and also the latest story that you've helped to get out. But I want us to talk first, talk about when you said some of the stories are not for publication, it's for the families. The thing I had to write it down because what struck me was I used to work in the hospital as a chaplain. And so one of
Oh,
our jobs is to help people tell their stories but at the end of life. And
mm,
a lot of times people have untold stories. They have
yes,
not been able to tell anybody, but they have been needing to release it. And
yes,
when they're able to tell their stories, the brightness that comes upon their face because they're sitting in a room with someone who has given them permission to be
yes,
open and honest and not be judged for whatever it might be that they need
yes,
to release. And it gives them the freedom and the peace where now, because I said with people at the end of life, they can die with dignity without a secret. And so
oh,
um, it's power. Storytelling is so powerful because oftentimes the stories that we tell if we really sit down and think about it, especially as women, um, it's intertwined with the thoughts that others have towards us. So we
yes.
cater that story um, to the hearer or to those who are onlooking, but to be able to. But I'm gonna let you because I think it's fascinating that you do this work, and I think it's so important.
Yes. So, Brianna, when you were doing this work uh, with end of life, I imagine that you feel, as I do, that it's sacred work, that listening to someone without judgment, with love and empathy, and just giving them that space, this is sacred ground.
Very.
And there is magic that happens between a teller and a listener when those stories are told, sometimes, like you said, for the first time in their lives,
Mhm.
that is healing. It allows people to pass on with peace. And sometimes when it's told in a way that can be passed on to future generations, it can heal intergenerational trauma. It can help people pass on the most important lessons they've ever learned in their entire lives. And when you get to be a witness for that, to hear something that is the most profound, poignant, tragic, when you hear that, it is a profound spiritual experience for both.
It is. What I love about it is I love what you said when you said it can be it's not just only for the teller, but also can be oftentimes for the hearer. of the story as well, right? And so,
Yes.
and we do handle it as sacred because it is very sacred. It's very special because for someone to trust you with their story, um, that's an honor. Um,
Yes.
but what I love is that the hearer oftentimes, and what I love about God is that He oftentimes puts us in places to hear things that we need to hear.
Yes. Yeah.
So the
Uh,
journey is not just healing for them, but it can also be healing for us as well.
yes. I imagine, again, like I've experienced, when you hear these stories, it changes you too. You
Mhm.
will forever be affected by what you've heard. And what a privilege to be able to learn from everyone you encounter. It's amazing work, sometimes exhausting. You have to be mindful of your own self-care at the end. Even if it was a positive story, that intensive listening energy can take some recovery time afterward.
Mhm.
And it may affect you. For me, every story affects me. I feel like I'm a different person at the end of it.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I mean, and this is what you do. I've never, so this is my first time ever even hearing of the word biographer. I've never heard of this word. Now,
Ah,
I don't know why, but I've never even, I think of people when we see or read in books of people telling their stories of their or of their life. Uh, I guess I never put two and two together that there has to be someone who helps them to do it.
yes.
So how did you get into doing this?
Um, it's actually a great story, and I'll be somewhat brief, but it feels very much like a calling. I had a different job. I grew up in a family business and then left the family business. I was an executive at a college.
Oh, wow.
Loved my job. We were doing important work there. And one day I just felt like I was supposed to be doing some writing. And I'm not a writer by training. I've just sort of always had a pen in my hand, like I just kind of naturally a wordsy person. And I thought, I don't know what this is. So
Mhm.
I tried to be mindful of listening to promptings. So I was like, all right, I don't know. I'm just going to circle a date on my calendar. And one day I have some time during the holidays. I'm going to sit down and I'm just going to like write and see if anything's there. Had no ambitions of writing a book, nothing. I just like, I don't know. So I sit down on the appointed date and all this stuff starts pouring out of me about my parents, about their faith, about growing up in a family business. I was very blessed in a loving home with uh, parents that followed their faith. And so it's all coming out. And in the middle of it, I get this call and I don't answer it. I have a date with myself and it rings again. And it's my sister-in-law and she never calls me. I'm like, I better answer that. So I
Mhm.
pick up the phone and she says, Rhonda, it's your dad. And my dad had passed away in the very moment I was writing about them. And my parents were married for 55 years. And a few days later, I got thinking, what is my mother going to do? And I realized, oh, we're going to write their story. We'll write their family business story. And so my mother and I processed our grief and we processed their life together. And it was the most amazing experience. I came to see my mother as not the mom, but a heroine in an epic love story. And we wrote it and we published it. And then afterward, people started to say, I loved what you did with your family business story. Would you help me with mine? So I started doing like side gigs. And before long, I was so busy, I quit my day job.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
here I am.
yeah. And but that's how life is, right? So when you lean in and you answer that call,
hmm
you know, it really does pay for itself, even though, we didn't start off looking to be paid. It's just like, but it pays for itself, right?
Yeah.
So and I think that's the beautiful thing of it. And what life is lived most at peace when we're living our purpose.
Yes.
Yeah.
That moment is an important, it's one of the storytelling moments. Like if you look at Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, there's a call and you have to decide, do I reject the call or do I answer the call? And inside you're saying, you've got the wrong person. I'm not qualified. I'm not this. I'm not that. And at some point you realize you have to, or you will die a spiritual death.
Yes, yes. And that's something because when you die a spiritual death, you are still physically here, but you're
Yes.
spiritually dead. And it's like there's no purpose, there's no meaning to life at
Right.
that point. So I think that's beautiful. So let's get into your book.
Yes.
So tell us about this lady, and how did you meet her? And um, so yeah, I'm gonna
Yeah.
start right there.
So at the time when I was introduced to her, she was recommended to me by, or referred to me by a former client whose family business story I had done. And I was busy. Like I was pretty well at capacity when I got this call. And I was like, I don't really have time for another project, but I love Norma, so I'll call Heidi. So I called her and I met her. And because I was busy, I kind of said, let's just do a little family history story. I'm not qualified, I'm not qualified to write a story about World War II Berlin. That is not my wheelhouse. So
Hmm.
let's just do a little family history. It'll just be for you. I'll capture your oral history and we'll get it done quickly because that's what I thought I could manage.
Hmm.
And Heidi said, that sounds great. You're the expert. I have a feeling it might turn into more, though. So I said, all right. And then I'm all in, right? And as she started to tell me her stories, she was such an amazing storyteller, and she didn't spoil it. She gave me the story kind of it as it unfolded. And there were moments I'm like, wait, what? Your mother attended a dinner presided by Hitler himself? What? I can't believe you didn't tell me that until
Okay.
4 weeks into our.
Yeah.
So there were these jaw-dropping moments. And so I'll tell you a little bit about the story. So Heidi grew up in Berlin.
Hmm.
She moved to Berlin at the age of 3, the month that Hitler invaded Poland.
Hmm.
So she's in living just a couple of kilometers from the seat of power of the Nazi government. Her mother is this beautiful opera singer who she's blonde, blue-eyed, had been recruited from the countryside in Poland, right on the Polish border, to for this scholarship at the State Opera. So her mother, everything's going well, right? She's out of the country. She's living in the big city. She has this little girl. Her Heidi's father was in the recruited to be in the army at the time, so he wasn't in the picture.
Hmm.
And so Heidi's mother is dating. She ends up dating this Wehrmacht officer who was on the staff of Magda Goebbels. Magda Goebbels was the wife of the propaganda minister. Magda Goebbels was considered the first lady of the Reich. She was like at Hitler's right hand on, she would like appear with him like the first lady because Hitler was never married until the very end. And so he was in her home. So Heidi's mother's dating this military officer, and then she starts to see what's happening. She comes to understand that her place in the opera was made available because they kept all of the Jewish performers out. And she has to wrestle with her conscience. I'm here because someone else was kicked out. And Berlin was kind of a fascinating place because it was the least Nazified place in Europe. I mean, in Germany.
Hmm.
So only, I think, 30%, don't quote me on that number, but less than half of the population supported Adolf Hitler. It was a cosmopolitan city of artists and intellectuals and not very Nazi, really, even though it was the seat of power. And Heidi's mother was involved in these artist circles. They didn't want this war, but you have to decide, where do I stand? What do I do? Do
Hmm.
I follow my conscience and help my friends, or do I keep my family safe?
Hmm.
And so Heidi grows up in the rubble as the bombardments reduce the city to rubble. And there's a moment at the age of 9 when I won't tell you why and how and what happens, but there's a moment at the age of 9 when she ends up living alone in a bombed out apartment for the final weeks of the war. Alone. Can you imagine 9?
Oh my gosh.
So that's the backdrop of the story. So, what are your questions? I mean, I just want to
I
have
mean,
this be a
I got a lot of questions, but
yeah.
I'm gonna have to read this book because I want to
Well, I
know.
hope. Yeah. I missed your question.
No, I said I don't have a question because I'm gonna have to get the book because if I start asking questions, you're gonna have to
Yeah.
tell me the book
Yeah,
because
I'll tell
now,
you.
yeah, I mean, because this is interesting to be,
Yes.
for one, oh gosh, what an honor for one to for you to be able to sit with her as she
Oh,
tells this story.
yes. And Heidi has become very dear to me. We worked on the story since 2019. So a pandemic came and went. I mean, all these things have happened, but it took me that long to really process the story, to do a deep dive on the history, because she had an amazing memory. She was remarkable in the details that she could tell me about the brand of radio, the food they ate, where she would walk, how far it was.
Mhm.
Children in the city were basically, they kind of ran wild. They were almost like feral cats. The parents were so busy. And when I say the parents, I mean the mothers. Again, the fathers were all gone. It was a city of women and children, and the mothers had to stand in ration lines all day to get a turnip and a potato. And so the children had free run of the city. So she ran around with an older pack of kids, and they would just get on the S-Bahn and go wherever and get into mischief. So the rubble all around them, they're digging through the rubble, finding stuff to blow up. I mean, it was sort of just the wild childhood that they had and the ways that they made fun. That's
Mhm.
one of the bright spots is that children are resilient.
Yeah.
They will find friends. They will make fun wherever they are. They'll play games. They will find a childhood wherever they are and in any circumstances, despite being always hungry, despite being cold, and despite the fear of the bombardments. She still had a childhood, and children, she came out of it with her light intact. And to
Yeah.
me, that's one of the takeaways of this story is that she sees things that no child should ever see.
Mhm.
She experiences things no child should ever experience. And yet, I get to see her at 88 as a beautiful, full of light person who is funny and a joy to be around and a joy in my life.
Oh, wow. I think that's beautiful because how can you go through what, because I can only imagine, because I've read other books, of people in that time. Um, and so, and knowing some of the things that they've had to experience, but to be able to come out and still have your light and not be in a place of bitterness.
Yes, yes. She is pragmatic in that she recognizes that war is part of it's part of the human experience, and we can never think that that's all behind us. She
Hmm.
sees, she's seen the dark side of humanity and knows that it's real. And that's part of the reason she wanted to tell her story so that we never forget and we never think that it can't happen to us.
Hmm.
But she's seen the best of humanity. She's seen when people have nothing, they will give everything. And that it's possible to come out and be joyful. And she lives in gratitude every day.
Yeah, I can imagine that she's when you talk about gratitude, I always like to couple it with contentment.
Yeah.
So
Tell me your difference between gratitude and contentment.
I really just don't see a difference, honestly. I don't think
Hmm.
one can truly be grateful unless they're already content. So even if you gave me a piece of candy, I'm grateful
Hmm.
because you didn't have to do it.
Hmm.
I'm content with the candy. And if you never do anything else, I'm just thank you.
Yeah.
You know, um, grateful for the little, but I believe that a person can't have true gratitude unless they've had to suffer and know what
Yes.
it is to not have.
Yes. And Brianna, that's one of the reasons why this story, felt so passionate about it, because I have a daughter who's the age of Heidi and
Mhm.
has been the age of Heidi through this whole process. And we live in a day when my daughter has never really had to suffer. And I worry, how do I teach gratitude? How do I teach resilience? Because I see what children are capable of by seeing Heidi's story. And the answer for me is storytelling. When we can consume through empathy someone else's story and internalize that without having to suffer the same things, we can feel it with them and learn from it and be grateful despite not having been through it.
Mhm. You know, with our kids who um are oftentimes more privileged than we were growing up,
Yes.
one of the things that I showed my children was this is I took them on a path that I walked literally. So this is how mommy would catch the bus.
Mm,
You know, you don't
yeah.
you don't understand that because we have a car to drive. Um, but when mommy was coming up, I had to catch the bus. And
Yes.
I had to sometimes fight for a seat because sometimes the bus would be so crowded and people aren't always nice and people, aren't easily to give up their seats for a woman.
Yes.
Men are just sit down, so it's like, and when you talk about empathy, talking and telling my story in such a way that they could really feel me.
Yes. And then we go back another generation and what our parents experienced. I
Hmm.
mean, talk about the privilege that I have. I can imagine the experience that maybe your parents had.
Hmm.
And I mean, I can't even imagine, but I try,
Hmm.
that's the part of empathy, right? I'm very privileged. Uh, we were kind of poor in our own way, but I never had to experience what it was like to grow up being discriminated against.
Hmm.
And yet those stories inspire me. And that's also one of the underlying messages in this book is courage.
Hmm.
Heidi's mother had to choose between doing the right thing and keeping her family safe, keeping abiding her conscience
Hmm.
and again safety. And she wasn't dumb about it.
Hmm.
She that there's a lesson there too, right? When we choose courage, some of the people that didn't survive just went headlong into it and they didn't survive. Heidi's mother was also teaching Heidi to be a survivor. So one of the ways she taught Heidi to be safe was to educate her.
Hmm.
She grilled her. She made sure that she knew how to answer questions or how to not answer questions if they were ever interrogated. And that's one of the lessons for me is that courage can be rehearsed.
Hmm.
It's one of the lessons from the civil rights movement
Hmm.
was that we can practice courage in advance so that
Hmm.
when the time comes, we can do what we have to do.
Yeah, I think that's important. I had an interview with Dan Sitman, the attorney for the Memphis Three. I don't know if you're familiar with that case, but he was the attorney for one of the
Oh,
young men that was accused of this killing, horrific killing. But he when he said to me, he said, I set my children down at the age of 10. And he said, I had to teach them that if you're ever stopped or or you are or you have to go into an interrogation room, this is how you are to be, and this is what
mm,
you need to ask for. And I thought to myself, isn't that something how we have to teach our children? Once you know, and these are things that you have to teach them how to be resilient and how to stand up for yourself, but do it in such a smart way that you're not um you're not displaced or you're not harmed in any way, if that makes sense. So I
yes,
think that's very smart. That's very smart. And sometimes the suffering, when I say suffering, um, sometimes children suffer in ways that we're like, what? You didn't get to get your purple pencil, you
hmm
know, and they don't and they take that so overboard. But even in the little things like that, so when they do get it, they're
hmm
grateful because they suffer, even though it was, but they still understand. My daughter, who was very picky growing up, oftentimes I would withhold things so she could understand, it's not a privilege to have this,
Hmm.
so when you
Yeah.
do get it, you know, um, make sure you take care of it and things of that nature. So yeah, yeah. Um, I think this is really good. I'm thinking about, Heidi when she was a young girl and some of the things that her mother taught her and how she learned how to really navigate around or in the situation that she was in. And I wonder, what did she teach the other children that was around her?
You mean what did Heidi teach the children, like her own children later, or in
No,
the
her
story?
friend, just her
I'm
friend,
sorry.
her friends. Because
Oh, her
sometimes,
friends.
friends will pick up on um you or the stronger child or the stronger
Yes.
friend. If that am I making sense? The stronger
Yes.
friend. Yeah.
It's interesting you picked up on that because that actually did play out in Heidi's story. She had a best friend who lived in her building, and Heidi's mother always carried herself with poise. And, as an opera singer, she had posture and she just had a certain presence and confidence. And she instilled that with Heidi. And you can see that even in Heidi today. She's such a beautiful, well-spoken, classy person. And this other girl in the apartment, her mother was the cleaning lady for the apartment. And this mother's mother, this child, her name was Ushi. Her mother sort of carried herself like a cleaning lady.
Mhm.
That she didn't have that confidence, and she almost looked at Heidi's mother, like Keita was Heidi's mother's name, like she was kind of a star. She was a little starstruck. And so Keita befriended Ushi as well, and helped build her confidence, made dresses for her so that the two girls had something pretty to wear
Mhm.
together. And I do believe that Ushi um, developed in Keita's presence and by being around Heidi, even though Ushi was the older friend, Heidi in many ways was the leader.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I figured. Um, because sometimes you can just tell when someone is the stand-up leader, regardless of the age. It's just the
Yes.
presence and the willpower and the resilience within that person. So I think that's beautiful. Tell us where we can get your book.
It is available on Amazon, so in any country, and it is available wherever books are sold. So if your bookstore doesn't have it, they can get it. Many libraries have it. So yeah.
Um, if one wanted to get in contact with you, are you taking on any clients?
So two things. My website, evalog.life, EVALOGUE.life. There are so many free resources to help you tell your story, to capture oral history of yourself or of your family. So take advantage. I have some oral history toolkits, some writing toolkits, and my own personal capacity is pretty limited. I can only work with a couple of people at a time, but I teach.
Mhm.
And so I teach classes. I have a January class on telling your own story. I felt like at some point I realized, oh, I can only do one or two stories at a time. I want to help more people. And so that's why I started helping. And plus, most people can't afford to pay somebody to teach. I mean, Heidi, that was a labor of love. I mean, I could never charge her what, it actually costs.
Mhm.
So that's why I love to help people through teaching to do it themselves.
Oh wow, that's good. You have such a sweet spirit, a sweet, sweet spirit. So I thank you
Thank
for
you.
joining us. And so for our audience, I want you guys to know to go to the description to find all Rhonda's information, links to the book, um, and go and support her. I want us to really support because I know that the story is going to bless us, and it's going to help so many people who are on a journey of sitting and learning how to, or getting to the place of telling your own story because it's
Yeah.
healing. It really is healing. Um, Before we end, I wanted to say this because it's funny that we're even having this conversation because I have been prompted to begin to tell my story which I do here and there, but I've never told it in its entirety. And so I am getting ready to take that step and begin to
Ah,
tell my story because I just know the importance of it. Um, and so I thank you again um, for joining us.
oh,
Um, and so, and so to everybody, thank you for joining us. And until next time, we will see you then.
thank you.